Schmello, mic test, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. Nice.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming out today. Oklahoma is facing an urgent crisis. Early last year, the new Secretary of Agriculture launched an initiative to review SNAP. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as food stamps. Now, the federal government has continuously funded food stamps since 1964, and the original purpose was to keep people from starving. The Secretary of Agriculture's review has been released. She cited multiple instances of fraud and called for SNAP reform. Congress also brought attention to SNAP last year. The most recent spending bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill, adjusted SNAP eligibility requirements and established penalties for states that do not enforce those requirements adequately. The emergency we face is that beginning in October of 2027, some states may have significant amounts of funding or may lose significant amounts of funding and have to pay for a portion of SNAP benefits moving forward. If nothing changes, Oklahoma will be one of the states that stands to lose hundreds of millions of dollars in SNAP funding, and Oklahoma taxpayers will be required to cover those costs. The Trump administration is demanding accountability for government spending, and Oklahoma is on track to fail that test. By October of this year, all states, including Oklahoma, will also have to pay for 75% of SNAP administrative costs. These additional SNAP-related expenses, which could cost Oklahoma as much as $270 million annually, will hit at a time when multiple state agencies are facing significant shortfalls. Oklahoma taxpayers are staring down the barrel of spending money we do not have, which could result in consequences we do not want. Regardless of how we got here, our nation's debt is now more than $38 trillion, and I appreciate that legislators in Washington are looking for ways to encourage better administration of our entitlement programs given to the states. I also applaud Governor Stitt's recent directive for a 90-day review of welfare programs in Oklahoma. And I would like to acknowledge that state legislators are also looking to address SNAP fraud and mismanagement in this session. It is critical for state and federal officials to unite to ensure that SNAP benefits are reserved for the families that need them the most. However, no one is addressing the root issue with regard to SNAP. The real problem is that SNAP eligibility is not subject to an independent audit in Oklahoma. SNAP is the only entitlement program in Oklahoma for which eligibility is not audited by an independent third party. The U.S. government does mandate that my team and I audit all federal grants above a certain funding threshold administered in the state of Oklahoma on an annual basis. We release the findings every year in the single audit report. In auditing federal expenditures in Oklahoma, we follow strict guidelines established by the federal government. And while the feds direct us to test many aspects of the SNAP program, the federal government specifically excludes eligibility from the criteria for us to audit. Again, that is not the case for any other federally funded entitlement program. The federal government maintains that an independent audit of SNAP eligibility is unnecessary because the quality control process currently in place is sufficient. As an auditor with almost 30 years of government auditing experience, I have to disagree with that. Current quality controls are not sufficient. In fact, they are woefully inadequate and ineffective. In practice, DHS, which administers SNAP in our state, investigates a sample of recipients and determines how many were ineligible for the benefits they received. That's the overpayment rate. Any known instances of fraud would be included in that calculation and constitute a fraction of the total overpayment rate. DHS also investigates a sample of its cases to identify how many applicants were denied benefits improperly or were underpaid. That's the underpayment rate. The feds review the results of those tests and investigate a subsample of the same groups. Here's the problem. The feds are working from the same test sample already reviewed by DHS. And that means the agency tasked with determining eligibility is the only entity testing eligibility. Now, I want to be clear. My team has not found any evidence of wrongdoing at DHS. I am merely pointing out that the entity which determines eligibility should not be the only entity that audits eligibility. It's a conflict of interest. If the states are going to share SNAP costs with the federal government, then the states should be required to conduct independent audits of SNAP eligibility, especially since enforcement of eligibility requirements will impact how much funding a state may lose under the accountability standards of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Let's discuss how that legislation may affect our state's budget. Beginning in October 2027, the federal government will slash SNAP benefits for states that have a payment error rate of 6% or higher. Oklahoma's error rate currently stands at 10.9%. The payment error rate measures the accuracy of SNAP eligibility decisions in each state. It is calculated by means of the same quality control process just described. And it's the only real metric we have to determine whether a state is enforcing SNAP eligibility requirements. Admittedly, from the Fed's point of view, there is a need to rein in payment error rates as well as SNAP cost, both of which spiked during COVID. The numbers for Oklahoma reflect the national trend. As you can see, Oklahoma's SNAP expenditures more than doubled from $820 million in 2019 to almost $2 billion in 2023. And while that number is beginning to recede, it is nowhere close to pre-pandemic levels. Oklahoma spent close to $1.6 billion for SNAP in both 2024 and 2025. Now, it's important to note that over the course of the pandemic, SNAP expenditures increased at a much higher rate than SNAP caseloads. That means rising costs were not primarily fueled by new caseloads. Rather, SNAP costs peaked in 2023 due to a dramatic rise in the amount distributed per household. During COVID, the feds allowed the states to distribute additional emergency benefits to existing SNAP recipients. Some were even allowed to receive more than the maximum benefit allowed for their income bracket. That's why SNAP costs rose by more than 100% from 2019 to 2023. While SNAP costs decreased slightly in 2024, payment error rates continued to rise in many states, including in Oklahoma. Now again, the payment error rate measures how well a state enforces SNAP eligibility requirements. Note that DHS used to enforce eligibility much more effectively. We had an error rate below 6% in 2017. The feds did not release payment error rates for 2020 and 2021, the height of the pandemic, which is why there's no data for those years on the graph. But by 2024, our error rate had risen to nearly 11%, just under the national average. There are many reasons for this increase, but according to DHS employees, one significant factor was the closure of regional offices. Some at DHS have suggested that when caseworkers had the opportunity to meet SNAP recipients face-to-face on a consistent basis, it may have been easier to establish a connection and follow up on relevant details that impact eligibility. Now, according to the current DHS director, another factor impacting the payment error rate appears to be high turnover and inexperience among caseworkers at DHS. The director has publicly stated he is taking concrete steps to address this issue. I've also spoken to him, and he has lined out a plan where he is trying to make this error rate decrease. And while I support these efforts, we only have 8 months to turn this around. My office is standing by to assist implementing controls to help reduce that error rate. But we can only do that if we are invited. If DHS does not act quickly to reduce the payment error rate, then the state stands to lose more than $235 million in SNAP funding each year beginning in October 2027. That's almost $250 million. So how much is $235 million? That's almost double what the legislature appropriated to the Department of Public Safety last year. If we do lose that money, Oklahoma will have to cover the cost and pay more than $235 million for SNAP benefits annually. That would be in addition to the extra $34.5 million in SNAP administrative costs that Oklahoma will have to cover starting in October of this year. DHS has 8 months before its SNAP data for fiscal year 26 is finalized, and the error rate for 2026 will likely determine our initial share of SNAP cost under the new system. It may be very difficult for DHS to implement meaningful changes within the next 8 months. But if the error rate drops to just below 10% for fiscal year 26, then the cost to the state would also drop substantially. We could save approximately $75 million annually if we get the error rate below 10%. DHS is under new leadership, and I believe there are many positive changes taking place in that agency. But it's very important that we urge the agency's new director to continue to do what he can to improve the SNAP payment error rate as quickly as possible. Doing this will save taxpayer money, and it will help ensure that the SNAP benefits are available for the Oklahomans who truly need them. At this time, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
You said that you would do some controls. What are the proposed controls?
If the DHS director invites us in to help assist in this matter, we would send a team in immediately, as early as next week. We could start doing an audit of the internal controls in place, really target those weaknesses where we think things are falling between the cracks, and help them shore up that system to make sure that that error rate's being decreased as quickly as possible.
Have you asked him to do that?
I just spoke to him earlier, and he is very open to the help.
You have the staff to do this. I mean, you have a lot on your plate already as an auditor with a whole bunch of reports that are in the process.
Thank you for recognizing the hard work that my staff is doing and how limited our resources are. But because we are already auditing the SNAP program, we already have auditors in there each year looking at this program in entirety, it would not be a big lift to also look at this and get that information quickly to the director.
What are some of those weaknesses? How does this big jump in this payment happen?
Well, as we explained, during COVID, a lot of things spiked. The Biden administration, through COVID, did lax some of those eligibility documentation requirements. I think that contributed to it. We've also found with other entitlement programs, whenever you're applying online, whenever you're self-attesting to things, that can always contribute to paying benefits that an individual may not be truly eligible for. Keep in mind, back in 2017, the error rate was down to, I think 6% is what I said. So we can easily get back there, but now is the call for action to make sure that we're not wasting $1 of our Oklahoma tax dollars, because if we have to backfill a over $200 million SNAP benefit program, we're going to have to look at reducing other services that are very important to our state.
And you're confident you can get that missed payment down in the 8 months that's required?
I am always optimistic, but ask me that question in a week.
Can you recap what the last single audit report said on SNAP benefits? I think it was 2023 was the last one that was out there.
Yes, so I do not have that information readily available. I can get that to you, but keep in mind, we did not test eligibility for SNAP. We aren't allowed to look at that piece of it, so I would not have information directly related to that.
Was that related to fraud, though, or something else going on in that program?
Fraud is only a small piece of the payment error rate. So keep in mind, the payment error rate is any overpayments made based on eligibility that was miscalculated, where they received more benefits than what they were allowed, and it can also include the underpayment rates. That's more rare, obviously. Fraud is just one small part of that, but it is included in that overall error rate.
Now, if you're able to look into it, the people that were overpaid, are they going to have to pay that back?
Well, that should already be happening, but again, this is a small set. I think in Oklahoma, they test around 100 cases a month. And so just to put this into perspective, since July 1st of 2024, in my fraud hotline, we have received over 70 fraud complaints of SNAP benefit fraud. Obviously, we direct those complaints to the OIG at DHS, so that they can look into those, but we do think that there is room for improvement. And again, entitlement programs are something that really can eat up a budget. We want to make sure that those are only going to the truly eligible beneficiaries who need those.
You go back, sorry, go ahead.
I think you said that you had no problem, you feel like that DHS is on the right track in trying to bring those error rates down. What would you bring to the table? What would your people be able to add to the mix to help them along? More staff, is that it?
That's a great question. The state auditor's office brings an independent perspective where we have trained auditors specialized in looking at internal controls to find deficiencies, to really root out where the problems are occurring and report those in a timely manner to the individual who can make a difference.
Have you had any conversations with the legislature about possibly doing something different in these kind of things, making that a regular part of the auditor's job?
It's my understanding in a discussion with the Speaker of the House that this is very important to him, and he is running legislation to help this situation to protect tax dollars.
Before these changes, what was the incentive of the state to clean up the SNAP program?
That's a great question. Before the One Big Beautiful Bill, there was no incentive for states to clean up any kind of misspending in the SNAP entitlement program. And that's because the federal government funded this program, or funds this program 100%. There is no state match. The only thing the state has to do is pay part of the administrative cost. Now, with the passing of the One Big Beautiful Bill, it is going to hold states more accountable for any kind of errors, to keep those, I mean, obviously, human error can be involved, but keeping that to a minimum to protect taxpayer dollars is the goal.
Wouldn't the government shutdown from last year for 6 weeks when SNAP benefits were kind of delayed and stopped, wouldn't that affect any kind of error rate calculation for a full year?
Keep in mind, the people, providing the benefits, enrolling the beneficiaries of SNAP into the program are state employees, and we did not have a shutdown here. So that would not have affected any kind of error rate on our side.
If you go back to DHS auditing itself, what's the story behind that? What's the reasoning?
That situation has been in place for as long as I can remember. That is the way USDA set up this program, to have the agency who received and administered the program to also provide the quality control and self-audit. Like I said, as a government auditor, I do not think that's a best practice. If they ask me what my opinion was, I think that we need to have independent audits in addition to the quality control, just to make sure that everyone's safeguarding those dollars. You know, entitlement programs are bigger now past COVID, and we are going to have to start looking at either we're going to, have to cut programs or find some way to fund these. It's important that these funds are going to the neediest of Oklahomans.
Do you have any idea of what programs you would cut first? Or that could be cut first?
Let me think about that.
Okay.
You know, whenever you start talking about cutting entitlement programs, these programs are there. Programs are there to be viable for the vulnerable, and we want to make sure those neediest get that. In every one of these entitlement programs, my staff and I have released audit reports that talk about eligibility protections not being in place. I think before we start talking about cutting programs, we just need to start taking care of the programs that we have been trusted to administer, and then we'll see where we are.
If you're invited by Mr. Cartmel to come and assist, would you also be trying to look at the administrative costs? Because we know that the state's going to have to start picking up 75%, I think is what you said.
Yes, previously it was 50%, now that's going to rise to 75%.
You might be able to bring some different efficiencies to save the state some money in administration.
I believe there are always efficiencies to be found in every aspect of government. If I'm requested to do that, we will certainly do our best to find the efficiencies in the administrative cost.
You already sent him an email or some correspondence and said, hey, I'm here, and have you had any response from him yet?
I spoke to him today, and I think that Jeffrey Cartmel, the new director of DHS, is doing his best to make sure that he is running that agency as a good steward of taxpayer funds, but it's a huge agency, and he's been there for a very short while. I fully expect him to look at this and make the best decisions for that agency.
Is your office doing eligibility reviews for senior care program at all?
We do. So that's part of the audit of the Oklahoma Health Care Authority, and that would be a part of the federal single audit. So that would have been reported in our 2023 single audit that we released earlier this year.
Now, kind of piggybacking off of that, 964,000 Oklahomans on Medicaid. So what is the potential for the spending of those funds, and is there anything that we can do to avoid that misuse or fraud?
And is that the misspendings related to Medicaid?
Yes.
We did a separate audit on that, so I would invite you to go out there and read that audit report. I do believe that there are areas that we can really shore up in that to make sure that only the truly eligible recipients are receiving that.
And what about rural health care? The misspending potential for that?
Related to which federal funds streaming, or federal streaming funds?
The hundreds of millions of dollars coming into Oklahoma from rural health.
That's the new, we haven't audited that yet. That's the new funding stream that will be coming, so that has not been audited at this time.
Is there anything you could do on the front end?
Yes, we are looking at that, and I will be making suggestions soon on that as well.
Does your office have any role in auditing the real choice tax credit at all?
We do not, so that would be administered through the tax commission, and we have not been requested to look into that at this time.
Do you think there's areas you could tighten up that program at all?
Well, because we've never looked at that, I don't want to make any assumptions about that at this time.
And you spoke about invitation. When does it stop becoming an invitation and turn into a demand or a must?
For the auditor's office to assist DHS, it would require one of two things. Either the director of DHS can invite us in to help, and I do believe he's open to that, or legislation can be passed that would make this a recurring requirement every year to keep this entitlement program in check.
And that's the legislation that is happening or has been agreed.
Well, that does not include the audit piece, but there is legislation being passed to help this situation.
I realize this is like asking a journalist when their story will come out, but we need an update on the Department of Education audit and the Turnpike Authority audit. So I know massive agencies, but is that something we anticipate having before the end of session?
Yes, SDE may be out as early as next week. OTA audit will follow within the next within 4 weeks. Okay, thank you very much for coming, and if there is any follow-up that my office can do, or if you need any of these slides, we would be happy to share those with you. Thank you.
Thank you.